How do you destroy 3 marriages with one USB drive? I know because I did it. And honestly, I'm not sure if I should feel proud or horrified by what I unleashed. My name doesn't matter, but my story will haunt you. 6 months ago, I was living what everyone called the perfect life, married to my college sweetheart David for 8 years, climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious marketing firm, a beautiful house in the suburbs. I was that woman other women envied at dinner parties, the one who seemed to have it all figured out. But perfection is just a carefully constructed lie, isn't it? And sometimes one person can walk into your life and tear down everything you've built, brick by brick, until you're standing in the ruins wondering who you really are. That person was Marcus Chen, senior account executive, devastating smile, and the kind of charm that should come with a warning label. When he joined our team in February, I should have run. Instead, I found myself staying late at the office more often, volunteering for projects I didn't need to take on, and lying to my husband about why I was coming home after midnight. Marcus asked me a question that first week that should have been my first red flag. He said he could tell I was hungry for something more than my suburban life could offer. How did he know? How could this virtual stranger see right through the facade I'd spent years perfecting? If you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. Because what started as a simple affair turned into something so twisted, so calculated, that by the end, I questioned everything I thought I knew about manipulation, revenge, and human nature. And if you want to hear stories like this that will keep you up at night, make sure to hit that subscribe button because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you can imagine. What I discovered about Marcus Chen would make your skin crawl. And what I did in response? It nearly destroyed everyone I'd ever cared about. It started with coffee. Marcus would bring me my exact order without me telling him how I liked it. Oat milk latte, 1 sugar, extra shot. Details my own husband had forgotten after 8 years of marriage. We were assigned to the Hartwell Industries account together, a multi-million-dollar client that demanded perfection. The project required extensive overtime, and Marcus suggested we use his private office. Tell me I deserved better than being overlooked, that I had more potential than anyone in that building, including our boss, that someday someone would recognize what I was really capable of. When was the last time David had looked at me like I was worth studying? When was the last time anyone had made me feel like I mattered? The first time we touched was reaching for the same document. Our hands brushed, and the contact lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. But in those 2 seconds, every nerve in my body came alive. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. That's when the text started. Strategy discussions that became personal conversations, complaints about our boss that became intimate confessions about our marriages. Marcus told me about his divorce 2 years prior, how his ex-wife never understood his ambition. I found myself sharing frustrations about David I'd never voiced to anyone. The emotional affair was more intoxicating than any drug. Marcus made me feel brilliant, desired, important. When I pitched ideas in meetings, his nod of approval meant more than any raise ever could. When he complimented my work, I felt a rush of validation that was genuinely addictive. 3 weeks later, we were working until 11 p.m., when Marcus suggested we grab a drink to decompress. Just one drink, at the bar across the street. One drink turned into three. 3 drinks turned into sitting so close in that dimly lit booth that I could smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. When he told me I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met, my chest tightened with something I hadn't felt in years. When he kissed me in the parking lot, I didn't stop him. For 30 seconds, I was someone else entirely. Someone brave enough to take what she wanted, Consequences be damned. Someone who deserved to feel desired and alive and reckless. I drove home with my lips still tingling and my wedding ring feeling like a shackle around my finger. That night, lying next to David while he slept peacefully, I made the decision that would destroy in ways David never could. When I complained about being overlooked for promotions, Marcus strategized with me about positioning myself for opportunities. When I felt intimidated by our male-dominated leadership team, Marcus reminded me I deserved to be in those rooms making those decisions. For the first time in years, someone truly saw my potential. The first time Marcus told me he loved me, we were lying in a hotel bed overlooking the city skyline. The words hit me like a physical blow because I realized I loved him too. Not the comfortable, familiar love I had for David, but something desperate and consuming that made me understand why people burned their lives down for passion. That's when he dropped the first bombshell. He wasn't divorced like he'd told me. He was married, 6 years, to a woman named Elena who worked in pharmaceuticals and traveled frequently for business. I should have been furious, should have felt betrayed and used. Instead, I felt strange relief. We were both cheating, which somehow made it feel less like I was destroying my marriage and more like we were two people caught in situations we'd outgrown. Marcus painted his marriage as loveless, a mistake he'd made too young to someone who didn't share his ambition. He made it sound like he was already emotionally divorced, just going through the motions until the right moment to make it official. Elena traveled 2 weeks out of every month, giving us entire weekends at his house. We played house like we were the real couple and our spouses were just obstacles. I learned he was secretly addicted to reality TV and played piano pieces he'd composed in college. Those stolen weekends felt more real than my actual life. When Monday came and I had to return to David, it felt like putting on a costume that no longer fit. The deeper I fell for Marcus, the more I began to resent everything about my real life. David's predictable bedtime routine felt suffocating. His contentment with our quiet suburban existence made me feel trapped and desperate for escape. I started fantasizing about leaving David, about Marcus leaving Elena, about us starting fresh where no one knew our history. But every time I brought up the future, Marcus deflected with joke, a spontaneous evening together. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt electric with anticipation. I was picturing his surprised smile, imagining how we'd laugh about my romantic gesture, planning how we'd spend the evening. When I reached his office, the door was closed, and I could hear voices inside. Not just Marcus's voice, but a woman's laugh, a laugh I recognized. Sarah Martinez from PR. Ambitious, stunning, recently divorced Sarah Martinez, who'd been making quite an impression on everyone, especially the men. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the takeout containers. Through the frosted glass door, I could see silhouettes standing much closer than any professional conversation required. I watched as Marcus moved toward Sarah, watched as the space between them disappeared entirely. This wasn't a business meeting running late. This was exactly what it looked like. And what it looked like was that I'd been replaced. The elevator seemed to take forever. When it finally arrived, I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked exactly like what I was, a married woman holding takeout food, about to confront the reality that her affair partner was having affairs with other people too. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes trying to compose myself before facing David. How do you walk into your house and pretend everything is normal? when your secret world has just collapsed? How do you make small talk when you've just discovered that the person you thought you were in love with has been lying to you for months? David was in the kitchen reviewing case files when I walked in. He looked up with a smile that made my chest tighten with guilt. That night, lying next to my husband while he slept peacefully, I made another decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly who Marcus Chen really was. I was going to discover how many other women he was manipulating, how many other marriages he was helping to destroy. I told myself it was about protecting other potential victims, but deep down, I knew it was about something much darker. It was about revenge. I called in sick the next morning for the first time in two soulmate. The most recent was from 3 days ago. Marcus bringing her coffee in bed with the caption, 6 years later and he still knows exactly how to make me smile. My stomach turned as I scrolled through months of Elena's happiness. She was beautiful, successful, clearly head over heels in love with the man who'd been telling me their marriage was a mistake. But social media was just the beginning. Saturday morning, I parked outside their house and watched Marcus and Elena work in their garden together. They looked comfortable, intimate in the way only couples who genuinely enjoy each other's company can look. She threw mulch at him playfully. He chased her around the flower bed and caught her in a kiss that looked nothing like the obligatory pecks of a dead marriage. I followed him to the grocery store, the dry cleaner, a coffee shop where he met friends who clearly knew and liked Elena based on how they asked about her business trip. The real breakthrough came when I started paying attention to his work patterns. I noticed Amanda from accounting working late more frequently, often on nights when Marcus was also in the office. Jennifer from marketing seemed unusually flustered after meetings with Marcus, checking her phone constantly and smiling at messages. I started documenting everything in a notebook hidden in my desk drawer. Marcus's movements, his interactions, the patterns I was beginning to recognize. Which women got his special attention? Which ones stayed late on the same nights he did? Which ones had started wearing new perfume? The picture that emerged was devastating. Marcus wasn't just having an affair with me and possibly Sarah. He was running multiple simultaneous relationships, each carefully compartmentalized to avoid detection. During a team meeting where Marcus stepped away from his desk, I quickly inserted a USB drive and copied his files. Hidden in innocuously named folders were screenshots of text messages, photos that looked like they'd been taken without consent, and documents containing personal information about various women in our office. Addresses, phone numbers, details about families and relationships. There were also financial documents that made no sense, payments to unknown accounts, transactions unrelated to legitimate business, what looked like evidence of expense account fraud. Marcus Chen was an expression that made my blood freeze. This wasn't my passionate lover or professional colleague. This was a stranger wearing Marcus's face, holding a manila envelope that I instinctively knew contained my destruction. My heart started hammering against my ribs as he asked how long I thought I could follow him around town before he'd notice. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was menace underneath that made me understand I'd made a terrible mistake. I tried to play innocent, but he cut me off with a laugh that had no warmth whatsoever. He opened the envelope and spread its contents across my desk like dealing cards. Photos of me sitting in my car outside his house. Screenshots of my work computer search history, showing all the social media profiles I'd been stalking. Security footage from our building, showing me at his desk during the team meeting. But the worst items were photos of David and me from our anniversary dinner. images clearly taken without my knowledge. Pictures of my house, my car, my daily routine. Evidence that while I'd been investigating him, he'd been investigating me right back. My mouth went completely dry. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead as the full scope of my situation hit me. Marcus sat down across from my desk like we were having a casual business meeting. He'd known about my surveillance from the beginning, he explained, with terrifying patience. He'd allowed it to continue because he was curious how far I'd go, how much evidence I thought I could gather. Now I understood. I wasn't the investigator, I was the target. He had enough evidence to destroy my marriage, career, and reputation without breaking a sweat, he told me. Photos and videos from our hotel encounters that I'd never known he was recording. Text messages that would leave no doubt about our relationship. A detailed timeline of every lie I'd told David. But destroying my life wasn't his goal. He was a businessman, and business was about mutually beneficial solutions. The problem was that I'd seen information I wasn't supposed to see. Financial irregularities, confidential client data, evidence of activities that was manipulating for pleasure. I was a victim of an elaborate blackmail scheme, and I was about to learn exactly how many other victims there were. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't face David, couldn't pretend everything was normal, couldn't lie in our bed knowing Marcus had photos of our house and had been watching us. I checked into a hotel and spent the night staring at the ceiling, processing the full scope of what I'd gotten myself into. By morning, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to submit to Marcus's blackmail, and I wasn't going to run and hide. I was going to destroy him completely. But I couldn't do it alone. If Marcus was blackmailing multiple women, I needed to find the other victims and convince them to work together. A single affair scandal might destroy my life, but a pattern of blackmail and corruption would destroy his. I found Sarah Martinez in the parking garage after work. When I mentioned Marcus's name, the color drained from her face in a way that confirmed everything I suspected. Sarah had been exactly where I was 3 weeks earlier. She'd discovered Marcus was seeing other women, tried to investigate, been confronted with evidence of her own infidelity, and threatened with exposure. She'd been paying him ever since, not with money, but with insider PR information he'd been using to manipulate client relationships. But Sarah wasn't his only victim. Amanda from accounting had been providing confidential financial information after Marcus seduced her, then threatened to expose their affair to her fiancé. Jennifer from marketing had been sharing competitive intelligence after Marcus convinced her he loved her, then revealed he'd been recording their intimate moments. The pattern was always identical. Identify a vulnerable woman with access to valuable information, seduce her with attention and false promises, create compromising situations for leverage, transform romance into extortion while maintaining the pretense of love. Over the next week, I carefully approached each woman Marcus had targeted. What I discovered was that he'd been operating this scheme for at least 2 years. He'd targeted women in every department, gathering information to benefit his own projects while sabotaging others. Financial data, well connected, too skilled at manipulation. We needed to coordinate our exposure perfectly, overwhelming him with evidence from multiple sources simultaneously so he couldn't spin the narrative or retaliate. That's when I came up with a plan that would either save us all or destroy us completely. We would expose Marcus publicly and professionally at the same time, making it impossible for him to silence us through threats. We'd present evidence to the company, to his wife, to law enforcement, and to our own spouses simultaneously, taking away his ability to control the narrative. It was a nuclear option that would probably destroy our marriages and careers along with his. But I was past caring about collateral damage. Marcus had turned us into victims. And the only way to stop being victims was to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else. We prepared multiple USB drives, each containing everything we'd gathered: screenshots, recordings, financial evidence, a complete dossier of Marcus's crimes and manipulations. We scheduled the revelation for Monday morning in early June, when Elena would be back from her business trip, when the executive team would be meeting, when our coordinated exposure would have maximum impact. But we underestimated Marcus one final time. He'd been watching us gather evidence just like we'd been watching him, and he had one more card to play that none of us saw coming. Monday morning arrived with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. We'd agreed to execute our plan at precisely 10 a.m. for maximum chaos and impact. I arrived early, the USB drive feeling like it weighed 100 pounds in my purse. Sarah, Amanda, and Jennifer were already at their desks, each looking as nervous and determined as I felt. We'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but the reality of destroying someone's life, even someone who deserved it, was more intense than any of us had anticipated. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked into the executive conference room where the leadership team was reviewing quarterly projections. Marcus was presenting his outstanding performance metrics with the same charming confidence that had drawn me in months earlier. He looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw genuine concern flash in his eyes, but he recovered quickly, smiling and asking if I needed something urgent enough to interrupt their meeting. My hands were shaking. Disgruntled former lovers. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too obviously authentic. While I presented to the executives, Sarah was simultaneously filing formal complaints with HR. Amanda was walking financial evidence to the police fraud unit. Jennifer was hand-delivering a comprehensive packet to Elena at her workplace. We'd also prepared disclosure letters for our own spouses, taking away Marcus's blackmail leverage. If everyone knew everything, no one could be silenced. The response was swift and devastating. By 11 a.m., security had escorted Marcus from the building. By noon, police had obtained warrants to search his office and home. By 2 p.m., Elena had filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order. By end of day, the company had issued a statement and suspended 3 other employees implicated in the fraud scheme. But Marcus wasn't done fighting. That evening, as I sat in my hotel room waiting for fallout to settle, I received a call from an unknown number. Marcus's voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not charming or threatening, but broken and desperate. He begged me to call off the investigation, promised to confess to everything if we'd handle it privately. He claimed going public would hurt innocent people, that Elena didn't deserve to have her life destroyed, that we were overreacting to consensual relationships between adults. When begging didn't work, he tried one last manipulation. He told me he genuinely loved me, that I'd been different from the others, that what we'd shared had been real, even if everything else was a lie. But I'd learned too much about Marcus Chen to be manipulated again. I told him he'd made his choices and now had to live with consequences. Then I hung up and blocked his number. That night, the local news ran a story about a prominent marketing executive arrested on charges of fraud, extortion, and sexual harassment. Everyone who worked with us knew exactly who they meant. Marcus Chen was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. Elena divorced him and moved across the country. The company implemented new harassment faced consequences. That wasn't the woman he'd married, and it wasn't someone he could imagine building a future with. His words hit harder than any punishment Marcus could have devised. I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't think you do either. Sarah's engagement ended when her fiancé learned about the affair. Amanda's marriage survived, but barely, and only after months of counseling. Jennifer temporarily lost custody of her children when her ex-husband used the scandal to argue she was unfit. We'd all paid a devastating price for our revenge, even though we'd been victims from the beginning. The court of public opinion doesn't always distinguish between predators and prey, and office gossip painted us as vengeful women who'd destroyed an innocent man because he'd rejected our advances. I lost my job 6 weeks after Marcus was arrested. Not officially because of the affair, but because my position was being eliminated due to restructuring. The fact that my replacement was hired 3 days after my departure was purely coincidental, according to HR. My career in marketing was over. No company wanted someone whose name was associated with a high-profile workplace scandal, regardless of whether I'd been victim or perpetrator. 8 years of building a professional reputation, destroyed in weeks. But the personal cost was even higher. I'd discovered I was capable of things I'd never imagined. That I could lie systematically to someone I loved, manipulate other victims into joining my cause, orchestrate the complete destruction of another person's life, and feel justified doing so. Marcus had been a predator who deserved consequences. But in ensuring he faced those consequences, I'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone calculating and ruthless, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve her goals. The affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness I could have recovered from. But the revenge had been a choice, a deliberate decision to prioritize my desire for justice over everything else in my life. And that choice had cost me my marriage, my career, and my sense of who I was. 6 months later, December, 8 months after Marcus had been sentenced. I was in my studio apartment working on a proposal for a local bakery when my phone rang with Elena's number. I hadn't spoken to Marcus's ex-wife since the day we'd exposed him, though I'd heard she'd moved to Seattle and was rebuilding her life far from the wreckage. She sounded exhausted, defeated in a way that made my chest tighten with guilt. She needed to see me, she said. There were things about Marcus, about what he'd done, that I needed to know. Things that had come to light during divorce proceedings that changed everything. We met at a coffee shop downtown the next evening. Elena looked older, fragile in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of how I'd looked after my own life exploded. She brought a manila folder that I recognized with sick déjà vu. My hands started shaking as she opened it. Marcus had been planning everything from the beginning, she told me. Not just the affairs or blackmail, but something much more elaborate than any of us had realized. The folder contained documents hidden in a safety deposit box Marcus had kept secret throughout their marriage. Bank statements showing payments from multiple companies, including our competitors. Contracts for consulting services never reported to our employer. Detailed dossiers on every woman he'd targeted, including psychological profiles and vulnerability assessments. But the most disturbing items were recordings. Hours of audio from conversations Marcus had secretly recorded with each victim, including me. Not just romantic encounters, but our planning sessions, our strategy meetings. Every word we'd spoken coordinating our revenge. My stomach dropped as the implications hit me. Marcus had known about our plan from the beginning. He'd allowed us to gather evidence, recruit victims, coordinate our exposure, because it served his purposes. Our revenge hadn't been a surprise attack. It had been the final phase of an elaborate con designed to destroy not just our careers and marriages, but our sanity and self-worth. The recordings revealed conversations I'd forgotten half egg and compelling story about being wrongfully convicted. Elena showed me photos of Marcus's prison cell, which looked more like a college dorm than punishment. Pictures of him in educational programs, working on his appeal, corresponding with supporters who believed he'd been railroaded. The man who'd manipulated us into destroying our own lives was spending incarceration writing a book about his experience, with a literary agent already lined up. But there was one more revelation Elena had saved for last. Marcus hadn't just been planning his disappearance. He'd been choreographing our destruction so thoroughly that even our revenge had been scripted to cause maximum damage. The reason David had left me so quickly, the reason my job had been eliminated so efficiently, the reason media coverage had been slanted against us, Marcus had spent months before his exposure planting seeds that would bloom into our downfall. Anonymous tips to HR about my performance, subtle suggestions to David about my late nights, carefully placed rumors that primed everyone to see us as villains. Even our moment of triumph had been scripted by the man we thought we were destroying. I left that coffee shop feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Everything I'd thought I understood had been wrong. I hadn't been Marcus's victim who found strength to fight back. I'd been his final mark, unwitting participant in a con so sophisticated that I'd helped execute my own destruction while thinking I was achieving justice. But Elena hadn't come just to share the truth. She'd come to propose something that would finally, truly, completely destroy the man who'd orchestrated all our pain. Because there was one thing Marcus hadn't counted on, one variable he hadn't anticipated in his elaborate scheme. Elena handed me another USB drive, this one containing evidence of crimes so much worse than anything we'd discovered, that they would ensure Marcus never manipulated anyone again. The drive contained proof that Marcus's scheme went back over a decade, spanning multiple companies and dozens of victims, financial fraud totaling millions, evidence of actual assault, not just manipulation, documentation of identity theft and corporate espionage that crossed state and federal lines. Most damning were recordings we'd used to expose Marcus's crimes at the office. It was this one, containing evidence that would ensure Marcus Chen spent the rest of his life in actual prison, not the comfortable minimum security facility where he was currently writing his memoir. If you think this story is over, you're wrong. Because what Elena and I did next makes everything you've heard so far look like child's play. And this time, Marcus never saw it coming. If you want to hear about what happens when victims truly understand the full scope of what they're fighting against, make sure you're subscribed. Because the final chapter of Marcus Chen's manipulation is darker than anything you've heard so far. And this time, he won't be walking away.